Imagine a world shattered by World War I, millions dead, empires gone, and a desperate hope rising from the ruins, never again. The war had left not just physical scars, but deep wounds in the collective psyche of humanity. Cities lay in rubble, families were torn apart, and an entire generation was marked by loss and trauma. The sheer scale of destruction was almost unimaginable, and the world seemed to teeter on the edge of despair. Out of this trauma, the League of Nations was born, a bold experiment, an audacious attempt to end war forever. It was a vision that dared to hope for a new era, one where nations would come together not as rivals, but as partners in peace. Before 1914, war was often seen as a tool of statecraft, a way for nations to assert power or settle disputes. But the Great War's horrors changed everything, shattering old illusions about glory and honor on the battlefield. Machine guns, poison gas, and relentless artillery made killing efficient and impersonal. The battlefield became a place of mechanized slaughter, where bravery was no match for industrialized death. The devastation left a global yearning for a better way. People everywhere longed for a future where such suffering would never be repeated, where hope could rise from the ashes. Never again wasn't just a slogan, it became a mission, a rallying cry for a generation determined to break the cycle of violence. The League's goal was revolutionary. Embodied post-war optimism and the belief that humanity could learn from its mistakes. It was a symbol of faith in progress, in the possibility of a better, more peaceful world. It was a fragile, beautiful idea, nations choosing cooperation over conflict, unity over division. The world watched with cautious hope, wondering if this new experiment could truly change the course of history. The world watched, holding its breath, hoping this new system could prevent another catastrophe. Every headline, every broadcast carried the weight of expectation and the fragile promise of peace. The League was a gamble on our better angels, built on the ashes of the worst war the world had ever known. It was a leap of faith, a testament to the enduring human spirit. But as history would show, even the boldest dreams can be heartbreaking and fragile. The League's story is a reminder of both our highest hopes and our deepest vulnerabilities, a dream born from nightmare, forever echoing through the halls of history. The League's main architect was U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, an idealist who believed that reason, diplomacy, and shared values could reshape the world after the devastation of World War I. Wilson envisioned a new era where nations would settle disputes not with weapons but with words and cooperation. His famous 14-point speech, delivered to Congress in 1918, called for a General Association of Nations, a bold proposal that would become the League's foundation. Wilson's vision was to create a system where collective security and open dialogue would prevent future wars, and where even the smallest nations would have a voice. In 1920, 42 nations came together as founding members, setting up the League's headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. The city became a symbol of hope, chosen for its tradition of peace and impartiality. For the first time in history, countries had a permanent forum for dialogue instead of war, a place where diplomats could meet, negotiate, and try to resolve conflicts before they escalate. But there was a glaring absence. The United States, the League's chief champion and the world's emerging superpower, never joined its own creation. Wilson faced fierce opposition at home. The U.S. Senate, wary of entangling alliances and haunted by the memory of war, feared that joining the League would drag America into future conflicts not of its own making. Without U.S. support, the League was weakened from the very start. The absence of the world's most powerful democracy left a void no other nation could fill. It was like launching a global project without your biggest backer, trying to build a bridge with the keystone missing, or a house with a crucial wall left out. Britain, France, Italy, and Japan stepped into the League, but the absence of America left a gaping hole in the League's structure and credibility. The organization struggled to command the respect and authority it needed. The League's credibility and power were undercut before it even began. Its ability to enforce decisions and maintain peace was questioned from the outset. This missing keystone haunted the League's every move, casting a long shadow over its efforts and ambitions. The organization would always unity that never quite materialized as intended. The League's foundation was already cracked, and the world would soon see just how fragile that foundation truly was. The League's mission was ambitious: prevent war, disarm nations, and foster cooperation. Collective security was the core. If one nation attacked another, all would unite against the aggressor, using economic sanctions as a deterrent. Disarmament aimed to reduce the tools of war, making conflict harder to wage. The League also tackled global issues: disease, labor rights, refugees, and trafficking. It was a holistic vision: peace through law, cooperation, and shared progress. The blueprint was clear, the goal was noble. For a brief moment, it seemed impossible. The world held its breath, waiting to see if this experiment would succeed. But noble intentions would soon meet harsh realities. The League's daily work was diplomacy, talking instead of fighting. Disputes went to the Council, where nations argued their cases in Geneva, not on battlefields. The League slowed down crises, introduced reason, and sought compromise. Its World Court in The Hague offered legal rulings, though it lacked enforcement power. The League's real weapon was moral pressure and the threat of economic sanctions. If a nation was named an aggressor, it risked becoming a global pariah. Sanctions could cripple economies, at least in theory. The system relied on public condemnation and collective action. It was a revolutionary approach, peace enforced by global opinion, not armies. But would words and sanctions be enough? In the 1920s, the League scored real wins. It resolved disputes that once would have sparked wars, like the Åland Islands, where Sweden and Finland accepted a peaceful compromise. The War of the Stray Dog nearly escalated, but the League's intervention stopped Greece and Bulgaria from fighting. These successes built confidence in the system. The League's humanitarian work was groundbreaking, fighting disease, improving labor standards, and aiding refugees. The Nansen Passport gave stateless people hope and mobility. The health organization coordinated global responses to epidemics. The International Labour Organization set new standards for workers' rights. Quietly, the League was shaping. For a time, the optimism created just maybe war would remain obsolete, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The League's fatal flaw? No army of its own. It depended on member states, especially Britain and France, to enforce decisions. Unanimous votes were required for action, making decisive moves nearly impossible. Any single nation could veto sanctions or interventions. The League was never truly universal. The US stayed out, Germany and the USSR joined late. It looked more like a victors' club than a global body. Collective security required nations to act against aggressors even at personal cost. As the Great Depression hit and nationalism rose, that willingness evaporated. The League's power was built on hope and trust, both in short supply as the world darkened. When real crises came, the League's weaknesses would be exposed. The League's first major test came in 1931. Japan invaded Manchuria. China appealed for help. This was the League's moment. But the response was slow and cautious. Japan, a council member, ignored calls to withdraw. Britain and France, distracted by economic woes, hesitated. The League sent a commission. By the time it reported, Japan had created a puppet state. When condemned, Japan simply left the League. No sanctions, no action, just words. The League had blinked in the face of aggression. The message to the world: the League was powerless against determined great powers. Aggressors took note. The era of collective security was unraveling. The final blow came in 1935, when Italy invaded Ethiopia. The League condemned Italy and imposed sanctions, but not on oil, the lifeblood of Mussolini's war machine. Britain and France feared pushing Italy toward Hitler, so they held back. The sanctions were too weak to matter. Italy conquered Ethiopia. Emperor Haile Selassie's plea to the League, "It is us today, it will be you tomorrow," went unheeded. Soon after, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland, violating treaties as the League stood by. The principle of collective security was dead. Aggressors now knew they could act with impunity. The League's authority collapsed. The world slid toward another, even more devastating war. The dream of enforced peace was shattered. The League's failures opened the path to World War II. Its grand experiment had failed. By the late 1930s, the League was a ghost, its authority gone. its ideals in ruins. Once envisioned as the world's guardian of peace, it now stood as a silent witness to the growing storm. The grand halls that once echoed with debate and hope were empty, their silence a stark reminder of missed opportunities and broken promises. It watched helplessly as Hitler annexed Austria and Czechoslovakia, then invaded Poland. The world saw the League's inability to act decisively, its warnings ignored by aggressors who saw no consequences. The organization's lack of unity and real power left it paralyzed in the face of tyranny. World War II erupted, the very disaster the League was meant to prevent. Cities burned, millions fled, and the world was plunged into chaos. The League's failure was not just political, but deeply human, as lives were shattered by the conflict it could not stop. In 1946, the League dissolved, a casualty of its own limitations. Its doors closed quietly, marking the end of an era. The dream of collective security seemed lost, and many wondered if international cooperation was even possible. Was it all for nothing? Not entirely. The League's story became a cautionary tale, studied by diplomats and historians alike. Its archives held valuable lessons about the dangers of inaction and the need for stronger institutions. The League's failures became lessons for the future. Leaders realized that peace required more than good intentions. It demanded real authority, unity, and the willingness to act. World leaders studied what went wrong and built the United Nations to avoid those mistakes. They gathered in San Francisco, determined to create a stronger, more effective organization, one that could truly uphold peace and security. The UN kept the League's humanitarian work but gave real power to its Security Council. This new body could take decisive action, backed by the world's major powers, to confront threats and maintain order. The U.S. joined from the start, and major powers had a permanent seat at the table. This time, the world's strongest nations committed themselves to the cause, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. The League's ghost haunts the UN, a reminder of both the dream of world peace and the difficulty of achieving it. Its legacy is a warning and an inspiration, urging today's leaders to strive for unity and vigilance. The audacious hope of the League lives on, reshaped by hard-earned lessons. Its spirit endures in every effort for peace, reminding us that even in failure, seeds for a better future can be sown.